This is Good Morning Uganda.
At exactly 8, thank you for keeping it with us here on UBC TV. I'm Robert Chiravo, and this is Good Morning Uganda Agenda. Now, what we usually do is this is one of the segments where we get feedback from you because you're able to send us a text message, a WhatsApp message, and we read it out and then share that with our guest, and you get feedback. So wherever you are, this is a very interactive segment, and I just want to applaud you to ensure that as you follow the discussion, because at a certain point I'll be reading what your comments are on our various social media platforms. Now today we are going to be discussing something of national importance, and that is enhancing investment in Uganda. Many a times we've talked about scarcity of jobs, and His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Uganda, Yoweri Museveni, has always said, let's do what it takes to attract investors in Uganda. When they come, we reduce on what we import and we improve on what we export. But also there is so much of job creation in Uganda. And there's always been direction towards the agriculture sector. How do we get investors that can add value to our agricultural processes? Now, this morning, I have one of the investors in this country that are looking at the agriculture sector, and to be more specific, that is the cotton sector in Uganda, adding value and, of course, fulfilling that vision of improving our exports. And this is Sav Bedi, who happens to be the CEO of Fine Spinners Uganda. You're most welcome.
Thank you very much.
Now, to begin with, just tell our viewers more of what Fine Spinners, what do you do in Uganda, apart from us knowing that, yes, when I move around Bugorobi, I see a structure and I'm like, yes, there must be something happening. I know many Ugandans, or some even putting or no, using these products. We are promoting Bubu now, but when we see investors, we want to know what particularly do you do?
So Fine Spinners Uganda was a company that we set up in December 2014 with the intention of full value addition to Ugandan cotton. So our value proposition is a fully vertically integrated setup, right from cotton farming all the way through ginning, spinning, knitting, dyeing, garmenting, and then eventually we export our garments to Europe and the US. Our primary aim was the business was set up for an export purpose. However, since COVID, we've actually now had an inward look, and we're actually supplying a lot regionally and into Uganda as well. We employ about 1,600 people within our premises in Bugolobi, and we make a multitude of apparel which we supply throughout the region. We're one of the largest cotton players in sub-Saharan Africa now.
Very interesting. I'm so interested in the word value addition. Take us through your value additional chain, because for us, yes, when we know all about growing, we shall have the cotton.
Yeah.
Our farmers are ready to plant anything as long as there is market for that. Now, when you talk about value addition, they struggle with whatever they produce. So I'm so much interested in knowing how are you adding value and what is the chain like?
So that is actually a very interesting question. In my opinion, Uganda used to, about 10, 20 years ago, have 90% of its exports as primary raw materials. Today that number is down close to 43%, which shows some progress in our export basket. Value addition is, especially in the agricultural value chain, is how I believe Uganda can derive competitive advantage. Primarily because of its location and very fertile soils, the agricultural supply chain with its inputs are very useful to be able to enhance your export basket. So what are we doing? Cotton is grown in Uganda through many smallholders, and there is a model which has been implemented across, and it's a very core part of NDP3, which is the nucleus farm model, which is one large farming setup with a support system with the smallholder farmers. One of the things we should consider is having enough throughput from the farm side, which is also one of the reasons why value addition in many sectors doesn't manifest in the competitive advantage for those sectors as they should, because the throughput is not great enough. So once you've got your cotton lint, it comes from seed cotton. It is turned into cotton lint at ginneries. There are about 45 ginneries in Uganda, most of which do not operate near full capacity, again as a result of lack of raw material of seed cotton. That will filter through to our factory, and our factory will then, here in Kampala, spin that to yarn, knit and weave that into fabric, and then from fabric we will have garments which are produced, and that will be sold locally and internationally. If you look at the value addition in the cotton supply chain, we're adding anything between 14 to 15 times value to that cotton lint that we get. So that's where you can actually release the value of the exports for Uganda and even regionally. Put it into context, Uganda exports about $40 to $50 million of cotton lint every year. And if that had full value addition, let's say there were 10 fine spinners or 10 companies like us who were adding full value to the cotton value chain, that export goes from $40 to $50 million to $750 million. That becomes the largest export for Uganda. And I think this is where we see a great opportunity.
Now let's look at the region. How are you capitalizing on trade in this bloc, most of the East African region?
So trade in the region is incredibly important. EAC as a customs union is one of the most important trading partners for Uganda. So being a Kenyan business which is invested in Uganda in 2014, we realized that there are certain strengths for either country. With our operations in Kenya, which we have a polyester value chain, we rely on the fact that we have the coast. The coastline meaning export processing zones, importing fabric from China, processing, exporting to the US. That's a large part of the Kenyan textile and apparel space. Kenya is one of the largest exporters under AGOA. They export about $500 million per annum, and that is because of the coastline and the proximity to a port. However, on the flip side, in Uganda, because there is an abundance of cotton, we only consume 10% of Uganda's cotton crop. And there's an opportunity to add value to that, and you're not transporting cotton to Kenya to process it because that's transporting waste. When you spin cotton or when you gin cotton, you lose a remarkable amount. If you look at the spinning process, 30% is lost at that stage, so you're transporting 30% waste. So the way we set up our business is to make sure that Uganda exploits its natural resources, in this context cotton, and adds value to that and exports that, whereas Kenya relies on its coastline. So there are comparative reasons why each of the EAC economies are tied at the hip. And we must exploit that rather than Uganda trying to copy what Kenya does. There's no reason why Uganda should try and build EPZs similar to Kenya because of its distance from the port. And the inland haulage cost from Mombasa to Kampala, about $3,500. You don't incur that cost if you're producing in Mombasa. Whereas the reverse, for us, when we're exporting from Kampala to Mombasa, a 40-footer is $1,500. So we benefit from the low cost of reverse cargo. And I think each country should complement each other on its natural advantages. I believe the agricultural value chains that exist in Uganda, not just in my sector, but sugar, tea, coffee, milk, all of these are much more competitive in Uganda than Kenya. So we must see ourselves as a regional bloc which are complementing each other and not using non-tariff barriers to prevent exports of Uganda going into Kenya.
Now, rightly talked about value addition, and of course this brings me to away from now exporting, and of course we know we are reducing on our imports, we are getting a foreign exchange when we export. I want to take you a little bit to this farmer. How are you transforming? Is there any way that this factory, fine spinners, its presence in Uganda, has helped improve the livelihoods of the ordinary farmer? Because we look at this in two approaches, that we are going to get foreign exchange, then we go now to second level, which is employment directly. People are going to be working in the factories. But then third, and to me most important, is this ordinary farmer. How do you transform this person? Do you go to that extent? Is there anything that you can cherish about that?
Yeah, so the farmer is the most integral part of our supply chain. And we thoroughly appreciate the smallholder farmer setup, primarily because of the trickle-down wealth effects that it creates. When we moved into Uganda, the cotton yields were about 60% of where they are today. So we've increased the cotton yields. It was the global average of about 70% on a hectare. Uganda was operating close to 35. Now I'm proud to say it's about 50%. And that is a result of farmer education. We have spent time through buying agents, outreach programs, teaching farmers, how to use pesticides, how to line your crops. That sort of thing can all improve yield. Also, in terms of price, if Uganda continues to export lint, then a lot of the cotton is bought up by traders and exported across the world, which is a very competitive, commoditized market. However, if you have a factory like ours, which is adding 14 to 15 times value to the cotton lint, you're in a position to actually pay a higher price to have that cotton consumed locally. And that's where the farmer benefits, because they can get a higher price for their cotton from local industry, then selling it to a trader who will then put his margin and export it out of Uganda. So there's been a trickle-down impact in terms of absolute price. There's been a trickle-down impact in terms of farmer training. And we've engaged international organizations like Cotton Made in Africa and the Better Cotton Initiative to actually come on the ground, certify ginneries, and teach farmers best practices which are operating around the world. That improves the yield per hectare, and at the end of the day, that's exactly what a farmer needs.
Now also, this brings me, we'll explain about the issue of the farmers, that yes, there is something away from just monetarization, catch money, give me your cotton, but also giving them skills and how best they can do that. Every time, though we want so much exportation, and I want to commend fine spinners for that, but one thing that always comes to my mind, why is it that certain times products manufactured in Uganda are very expensive compared to products bought in Uganda? If you made a shirt from fine spinners, of course the quality speaks for itself, it will be really, really good. But you find that actually I've come across many investors that for them they're just in Uganda, but for export purposes only. Yes.
So the notion of relative expense comes down to the GDP per capita and comes down to affordability levels. If you look at like us, we currently control about 40% of market share in Chikubu markets and Nasa Road. So we're supplying t-shirts into those areas. It's a different product line to our export products, but you're able to procure a t-shirt for 8,000 Uganda shillings, which when we've done our research, that seems relatively affordable to most Ugandans. And in terms of the GDP per capita, you see a lot of companies who have set up here for exports don't see the market opportunity in Uganda, but I think that's a mistake. Especially post-COVID, I think one of the most important things we've learnt from the crisis, which distorted all supply chains, closed all international markets, was the fact that we needed to actually understand that we need to be self-sufficient as a country. And that's something which I think we have played a very big role in over the last 3 years. Make the products affordable, understand the market dynamics, understand the demand, and cater towards that supply into the market. So we have got about 50% of our book now going into the local market, and it's been happening for 3 years. So I think the question is understanding the market opportunity, which a lot of international investors who come to Uganda do not, and understanding that Uganda is one of the youngest populations in the world. And as a result, the middle class is only going to grow, especially with the kind of top-down policies which His Excellency has put in place through NDP3. This kind of approach to value addition will create wealth within this country. The oil exploration will create wealth within this country, and it's important to have a presence in the domestic market.
Now, we've just mentioned about COVID. How are you handling the currency fluctuations, more so when we hear that economies, investors were greatly put out by COVID-19, or they're moving in a staggered form because this really hit great economies? And when it comes to Ugandan investors here, how are you handling this?
So, I think COVID obviously was catastrophic across the world. However, in Uganda, I think we were relatively insulated. Not only were the policies implemented by His Excellency been fantastic in preventing the spread as bad as it could have got, our young population also was able to weather a lot of the issues associated with higher mortality rates, XYZ. In terms of what it did to supply chains, I think it made, Uganda still has a current account deficit, still imports more than it exports. However, one thing which is really important to understand is Uganda is food secure. And the food security within Uganda ensures that there is no mass drought or starvation in the country. That cannot be said for some of our neighbors like Somalia or Kenya. So that really helped. We didn't have a large amount of famine, XYZ. Kenya is battling now with massive amounts of famine in the north. And I think that's because of the food security in Uganda. In terms of a business in operating in this COVID environment, one thing we realized is shorten your supply chains, increase vertical integration, make sure everything is under one roof. Because we are using Ugandan cotton and fully value adding, we were able to operate through the entire pandemic. There was no demand domestically, for sure. There was no demand internationally. But the little demand that we did have internationally, we would send by plane. But we were able to operate, and that shows the resiliency of our supply chain and of our business model, because we're not relying on an imported supply chain from China, from India. However, what has come post-COVID, with the extreme commodity price volatility and the extreme currency volatility, I think more so than the actual appreciation of commodity prices and the depreciation of the currency. It's the volatility which is the problem. Because when I buy cotton and the price moves up to 150 cents a pound, down to 80 cents a pound, and then settles at somewhere near 120 cents a pound in the same quarter, it's pretty hard to actually hedge against, primarily because we are procuring for the entire year. Uganda's cotton season starts in October, ends in February, and we're going to have the cotton for the whole year. So that is really the bigger issue in terms of how to hedge against that volatility. And on the exchange rate, I think Uganda did an incredible job to keep the currency quite stable through the last couple of years. However, recently, over the last couple of months, we've seen a massive depreciation. That is something which is concerning to most investors. However, because we're an exporter, we benefit from a weaker domestic currency. But again, it's the volatility which is the problem. Touching 3,900, coming down to 3,750, and I believe yesterday 3,830. That sort of thing is hard to navigate, because how do you price your production?
Now, also, that brings me to one of the challenges I find with a number of investors in our country, which is how are you handling that is the cost supply chain, more so when you have countries like China and India, and at the end of the day, somehow it's the same market.
Yeah, so I think from a standpoint of how do we compete with China and India, the solution here is China and India picked out certain sectors. So for instance, in the cotton sector in India, they picked out a 10% export rebate to make sure that their products were competitive. When we do our costings in Uganda, not just in my value chain, but most of the value chains, you see, oh, how did China produce it at this price? How did India produce it at this price? You know, there are incentives from government, like the vertically integrated textile units get 5 cents electricity. This is globally competitive. So how is India cheaper on finished products? How is China cheaper? It comes down to state intervention and certain kickback programs and rebate programs that they have in those countries. Are they conducive to WTO agreements? Probably not. The US itself, even in its cotton sector, has massive subsidies. In Uganda, the cotton sector does not have subsidies. And when we're talking about subsidies, we're talking about inputs, raw materials. How do you make sure that the cotton that you're procuring is at your local Ugandan cost and not trading at global prices in the futures exchange in New York? When I buy cotton in Uganda, I'm buying at New York prices. It should not be the case. It should be ex-transport. So these are kind of things which we need to look at if we're going to create competitive advantage for our individual sectors and within the economy. If we operate off the local cost base, we will be able to extract that value. And I think the local cost base is actually quite good. If you look at our labor cost, it's one of the lowest in the region. If you look at our raw material cost, it's also one of the lowest in the region for the agricultural supply chains. So if we actually just look at the local costs and actually then value add on those local costs, we'll be globally competitive, because the rest of the macro things, infrastructure is in place, where we're putting in a lot of infrastructure. The government is supporting a lot of infrastructure projects. If you look at our labor cost, as I said, is very low. Efficiency needs to be worked on, and that can be done through training. The main impediment, I think, which we have not yet addressed, and that is an issue of our commercial banks, is the cost of finance. The cost of finance is still remarkably high. Uganda shilling borrowing for some companies is almost 20%. That means, what do you need to have as an IRR to make your 20% interest payment per year? You need a 30% IRR. That is not possible. You need an EBITDA north of 30-35%. So I think that's where we need to seriously look at and this is also a two-way thing, because Ugandans don't like depositing large amounts of money. And if you're not depositing long-term, banks do not have long-term money to lend. So you're looking at housing loans, you're looking at investment loans for CapEx, 5 to 7 years. That investment cycle requires too high an IRR to actually allow some of these businesses to thrive. And I think that's where we need to seriously look at how certain institutions like the development banks of Uganda can actually be used to lend to some of these strategic sectors.
Now, you talked about advantages like cost of labor is relatively cheap in Uganda compared to the rest in the region. This brings me to how you're addressing the challenge of youth unemployment. And here, to be more specific, meaningful, I want to add the word meaningful employment. How are Fine Spinners Uganda doing this?
Yeah, so I think meaningful employment is critical. We have obviously very large informal sector employment. We have a lot of stuff in the black economy, so to speak. However, we need to shift more towards industrial jobs. Industrial jobs, blue collar, white collar, XYZ. Now this starts off at the feeder being the education system, which I don't think there's anything lacking there. I think at the education system, there's numerous young Ugandans who are very smart, who are very ambitious, but now it's about companies like Fine Spinners providing the opportunities for them to be able to exploit their skills. So as I said, we have 1,600 people in Bugolobi. We have a plan to double up our capacity to 3,000 people. So how can we actually create meaningful jobs? It's creating jobs in management positions. It's creating jobs in industrial positions where you have people who have got tangible skills which are transferable. We currently operate a training school where we have about 100 trainees every month who come in, and we train them, offer them free lunch. At the end of the 1 month, they can join us, or they can go out to Chikubu Market or to Nasa Road and become tailors. So this is how we're actually increasing the skill set of the Ugandans, is by ensuring that there's a full-time training program running in Fine Spinners, and if you want to join us, come and stay. If you want to move on and join the informal sector, by all means, because even that is fairly lucrative if you have a skill set. The key is to make sure all of our youth have a skill set, because if they don't have a skill set, then unemployment becomes a huge issue. They become a problem on the balance sheet of the government, and then insecurity will rise, income inequality will rise, the Gini coefficient is already at record highs. We will create a fabric of our society will become very fragile if all our youth coming out of university, great education, so Makerere, XYZ, do not have a place to harbor their creativity and their skill set.
Well, there's a belief that sometimes Ugandan youth are not employable.
No, I totally disagree. I totally disagree. Most of our staff are between the ages of 19 to 35. So it's in that segment. So I don't believe that's the case. I have very high productivity levels in my export lines. I have people there who are operating at about 70 to 75% efficiency on the line, which is on par with Bangladesh, which is the best garment exporter in the world. We do about $40 billion of garment exports out of Bangladesh. So that is not true. That is a question of setting up the right training infrastructure within the corporation. But this is where I think government can also have a hand to play. Training should be encouraged at a corporate level, if not at centralized institutes, where we should get training allowances to allow companies to actually focus on creating meaningful employment through training.
I love the fact that you offer training, and more so when you said even free training. Because even if someone's not going to be employed, but they have gotten a skill, that means with that skill they can really add on economic growth of our country, because they can either be self-employed or skill is all that we need. Well, we are still looking at how we can enhance that is investment in Uganda, how we effectively can do that in our country. And I have, that is the CEO of Fine Spinners Uganda. These deal with our cotton. And one of the things that I cherish about them is they're 100% Uganda. They're using our cotton, they add value in Uganda, then they export, and also of lately sell to the domestic market. But let's look at how Ugandans perceive what is made home. Well, our government is pushing for buy Uganda, build Uganda. But we still have, I don't know, you're the people in this business. Do you find that mindset challenge when it comes to what is manufactured, what is made here?
For sure, and I think this is a kind of neo-colonial brainwashing which has existed for many years, that what we make will never be as good as what we import from other countries. I think this takes time to actually reconfigure in the minds of Ugandans, but it's also very important to know that if they can see when they're abroad, when they go to Europe, they go to Germany, Denmark, New York, and they see a t-shirt with a Made in Uganda label, that goes a long way to serving that if this is able to be exported to the 17 or 18 countries we export our garments to, then surely it is good enough for us domestically. Part of this is to do with the marketing. I think that a lot of the domestic supply chains have not looked at marketing properly and how to approach the notion of quality. They always think that this is a price game. And of course, in some sectors, there are elements of it being a purely price-sensitive market. However, they are in every sector different segments of the market. You must have a high end, you must have a low end, XYZ. So I think the question is, Ugandans need to know that we have one of the finest cottons. So I can speak for my sector. We have one of the finest cottons in the world. We have about a 29, 30 millimeter length of cotton, which is usually associated with long staple cotton. That can produce as good as, you must have heard of Egyptian cotton. We're using the same water from the Nile. So we have good quality raw materials and we're feeding it through. And so as a result, we're able to export to all these countries. I think the mindset needs to shift, whereby Uganda can produce quality and will produce quality if we market it in the right way. It's a question of sensitization of the customer.
Now, this also brings me to ask about how has AGOA helped you, that is to export the United States, that is duty-free, because we know now you're dealing in agriculture, value addition agricultural processing, and we know that really this is a window that was also availed. Is this real? Are we getting benefits of that, or does it just remain as?
So I think AGOA is an incredible opportunity. It has been extended till 2025. Has Uganda capitalized on it as much as other countries in Africa? I guess that scorecard would not show a great showing, primarily because our neighbors in Kenya are a very large beneficiary of AGOA. As I said, they do $500 million to the US, whereas Uganda's number is quite small. However, Uganda's number has been consistently growing. I think through the senior presidential advisor of AGOA to His Excellency Susan Muwezi, she's had a very big passion in developing this aspect of the business. And I think the question is how do we make more of these? There are quite a few businesses. They are not very large. We'd be probably the largest one in that segment exporting to the US. We need to ensure that those smaller businesses are incubated better and go through the value chain and actually grow to actually exploit the full market potential. One of the aspects there would be, as you raised, quality. Some of the smaller companies are not able to get that level of quality, so it needs to be worked on. And the other thing is compliance. To export to the US, they have all these phytosanitary requirements, which are basically non-tariff barriers to trade. That's something which needs to be addressed. We need to sensitize the companies, and various agents need to figure out how to actually improve the compliance levels of these SMEs to actually graduate to the next scale and actually exploit the full value of AGOA. I think duty-free market access to the US will probably be in place long after 25. Whether it is called AGOA or it's a bilateral agreement like what Kenya signed with the US under President Trump will be what's debatable. It depends entirely on what government is in place in the US. The Republicans favor bilaterals, the Democrats prefer this multilateral trade agreement sort of setup. So we have that marketplace to stay. And I think we need to seriously look at exploiting that economy, being the largest economy in the world by GDP and second largest by purchasing power parity. So I think the question is, how do we graduate the SMEs in Uganda who are working under the AGOA program to become larger corporates?
Well, we are still looking at investment in our country and, of course, promoting what is Ugandan made. How do we support what is ours here in Uganda? But also looking at people that have made breakthroughs in terms of exportation, because one of the challenges we face as a country is we are importing so much, yet exporting little. And if we can only improve on our exports, then that means we have so much of shock absorbers to economic challenges, but also we get more foreign exchange into our country. Now, like I earlier told you, you can be part of this show by simply going to our WhatsApp number, which is coming up on your screen. Send us a WhatsApp message, send us a text message, that is an SMS, and we'll be reading it out as we discuss investment in this country. And I'm honored to have one of the investors, that is the CEO of Fine Spinners Uganda, that looks at adding value to the cotton that is in Uganda. And I find that very interesting because we know that our farmers, what they produce then has market, and not just selling it in a raw form. You find that there is something where value is added and we export finished products, which our Excellency has always hinted on. Now, earlier you mentioned of this industry, Fine Spinners, first being in Kenya, and you only came to Uganda. What are the differences in terms of business opportunity when you look at these two countries?
Yeah, so Finespin is Uganda is part of a larger group called Betty Investments, which has been operating in the textile value chain in Kenya for 50 years. In Kenya, we run a polyester viscose value chain. In Uganda, we run a cotton value chain. We actually were encouraged to invest in Uganda after His Excellency President Yoweri Museveni spoke to my chairman and said, listen, you are adding value to Ugandan cotton in Kenya. Why? Why are you transporting waste? Did you not go to school? You're meant to be at the source of the raw material. So come to Uganda, see the investment climate. Now, having been in Uganda since end of 2014, I've seen some clear differences between the investment climate in Kenya and in Uganda. Kenya, being a larger economy, is more exposed to global headwinds. If you look at the Kenya shilling, it's been depreciating for almost 2.5, 3 years straight. And I think that's a reason because of FDI, hot fund flows moving in and out of the country. So policy-wise, what do I see as the main difference? I see Uganda's economic policy, the top-down policy, which is actually a result of your political stability, has been very consistent over several years. There's been a concerted aim to have agricultural value addition, which is where I think Uganda can actually, move to middle income status and above. That sort of consistency in economic policy is critical. In Kenya, with government shifts every 5 years, XYZ, sometimes the policy gets distorted from the top-down level. The bureaucracy in Kenya is also incredibly high. The ease of doing business, I find, in Uganda, as large investors, is much easier than doing business in Kenya, primarily because you don't get lost in the bureaucratic dogma that exists across the border. Here, there is a culture of let us do what is best for the country, let us take a decision, and then I should be able to defend it. For instance, if you went to the Minister of Finance in Kenya and said, this tariff is not necessarily useful for us, it's messing us up in this way, you'd have 100 reasons, you'd go to the trade office, this, that, you'd engage thousands of stakeholders and you won't come to a conclusion. If you went to Honorable Minister Matia Kasaija and said, we want to replace the imports into this country of second-hand mivumba, or we want to actually make sure that goods are not being dumped into Uganda, there can be a position which was taken about a year ago, which is a volumetric-based duty on importers who are under-declaring the value of cotton and textile apparel. So that sort of like fast, decisive action is very much part of the ethos and culture of the government here. And I think this is a top-down approach from His Excellency. And that's why it is much easier to implement business strategy when you've got continuity of policy and you've got a government which really does care about creating employment, really does care about its macroeconomic objectives. Again, everything stalls in a country the size of Kenya, with the government as devolved as it is and with as many stakeholders and divergent interests. Things stall quite a bit over there.
This also brings me to purchasing capacity. We talk about boo, 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 boo. But for investors in Uganda, what is that is purchasing capacity? Yes, rightly said that you're first more into export and not to Ugandan. But of course, you said about 3 years now, you've really been into domestic consumption on addition to exports. What is our ability to purchase, our purchasing power as Ugandans? And is this something that reliable for investors?
So I think the interesting thing here to note is if you look at the data, on what is GDP per capita in Uganda, and if that is a proxy of purchasing power, I think you will be surprised. At least I have been surprised. Primarily because I think that because Uganda is food secure, and the ability of most Ugandans to be able to live a normal life and not having to pay too much for food or for the food basket allows them to have a much higher purchasing power than what their simple GDP per capita would show. So the data and the stats is actually misleading. I find, especially because cotton t-shirts and trousers and XYZ is a consumer discretionary item. If you're in a recession or if you've got strong economic headwinds like the economy is facing right now, post-COVID, high inflation, XYZ, you will see a decrease in consumer discretionary, my sector. However, when the economy is robust and running normally, there is enough purchasing power capacity in this country to allow for me to dedicate increased capacity towards servicing the local market. That's why I initially started off with 20% of my capacity going domestically. Now I'm at 40 to 50% going domestically, primarily because I think the fact that food is so cheap and so competitively priced in Uganda, there is a higher chunk of salaries which can go towards consumer discretionary.
Also, what has been your strength as fine spinners Uganda into the market? We've had a number of investors that come, and after a period of time, they pack business. You know, we've had many that one time say, maybe things are not moving as expected. Most when it comes to the textile industry, we do not have a good story to tell. We were once excited, and usually when I move around, there's a building I see within your locality, I may not mention, but I know you know, we were all excited. Now we are taking things to AGOA, we are doing this with a number of trainings, and this didn't see the light of day. Investments, sometimes we've had investors that never kick off in a country, much as they have these incentives and all that. So what has been your niche to moving, sailing through the various storms for the time you've been here?
So I think it's the nature of investor, which is really the question, and that's the kind of due diligence that the government of Uganda must do before they give incentives to various investors from around the world who have no intention of actually setting up shop or just want to, you know, get land in Namawe Business Park and then, you know, build an office block or apartments instead of a manufacturing facility. So it's the nature of investor and the intent of the investor. If you look at incentives that the government provides in terms of fiscal and other incentives, it's about approximately about 1 to 2% of GDP. So it's a substantial amount of money which is going towards fiscal incentives for investors. I think I'm fourth generation Kenyan, and being East African, understanding the East African business climate and understanding how business operates in this part of the world is critical to actually implementing successful investments in Uganda. If you get investors from China, India, XYZ, they're used to very, very different economic structures, economic setups. For instance, in the textile supply chain in India, you can go and set up just a spinning unit. You can go and set up just a dyeing unit, and you'll be fine. You don't have to have the scale of investment that we have, which is across the entire value chain for you to be secure. If an Indian investor came to Uganda and said, okay, I want to invest in textiles, and put up a garmenting unit, he'd very quickly realize that, oh, importing fabric is very cumbersome because I'm so far inland that it doesn't make sense for me to just do garmenting. So it's an understanding of the local environment, which I think the successful investors in Uganda have adapted quickly, and the multinationals who have done well in Uganda is because they've adapted quickly to the regional environment within the EAC. And I think that's why some investors from far and away who don't actually understand what they're getting into in terms of market structure, market demand, actual GDP per capita, cost of finance, cost of infrastructure, all these hidden costs that you don't necessarily see when you're investing end up hindering their business development. And obviously, so that's why I think we should, as Ugandans, we should encourage Ugandan investors, we should encourage EAC investors, we should encourage the whole bloc, the customs union, as His Excellency says, we are one people, and if we view ourselves as one market, we are north of 100 million people and a serious opportunity. And with this new trade agreement, the AFCFTA, we have $3 trillion of GDP under that those countries, 1.2 billion people. So if we start looking at our region and start looking at people internally and say, we should build these investors up, build Ugandans, build East Africans, that's when you'll get serious investors who understand the market dynamics, understand the situations in these countries, and are able to actually run businesses for many generations.
A very interesting one, of course I know time is chasing us, but one interesting one is the issue of quality. Many times we've talked about Bubu. I'm so much concerned of buying Uganda, build Uganda. But there comes an element of quality. And I've seen some investors, I won't mention which companies, and when you go, they have the word for export only. You know?
Yeah.
And they'll tell you, this is for export. Then the rest is for Uganda.
Yeah.
We'll tell you, we want to support our investors with the quality of what they're offering us. But then you ask, but how come this investor is exporting to the United States? And what you're having here, Ugandans are acquiring the quality.
Yeah.
So how do you handle this issue of quality? Do you also go for export only, then home use only?
No, so I think here it's a question of price point. So as in any business, you will have different different products for different segments. And for us, His Excellency wears our shirt every day in the morning. So if it's good enough for the president, it's good enough for all of us. And we have our products. So if you wanted to buy like one of the products we sell into Europe and the US, it will be slightly more expensive than some of the cheaper products we're offering for promotional use, XYZ. And so you're not looking at a substantial increase. You're looking at about $3, $4. Still, it's not what you'd pay if you bought this in Europe, which is $16 or $20. So we're able to sell our basket of goods across the country. The question is about segmentation and appealing to which particular segment at what particular price. So the products are available, the quality is available. The question is, what price are people willing to pay for that particular quality?
Well, I've had a number of messages coming in, but many are asking me something similar. About 6 of them that I have here, and the list is here. Fine Spinners products are not on the Uganda market. We're looking for them. Fine Spin.
So you can go to Jumia. Our products are on Jumia, and we're in the process of actually building a retail network outside of the informal channels, which is Nasser Road and Chikubu Market. Online, you can find our products on Jumia. Especially all our export products are available on Jumia.
Well, let me have your final remarks to Ugandans in terms of investment, but also when it comes to this particular, that is Fine Spinners. How could Ugandans support? What must we do better to ensure that we have more investors, we promote what we have already, we retain our investors, and of course, in return, we benefit in terms of more foreign exchange, employment, among others?
So I think it all just comes down to patriotism. I think Ugandans need to be very patriotic, and they are. Ugandans are very patriotic. Encourage your own homegrown companies, encourage your various sectors. Let us not think that what we get from abroad, what we get from India, China is better than what we can produce here. Let us have a strong sense of patriotism towards our country, and that's the way we will build our country, create jobs, and employ our people.
But also, I've just come to that there are a few messages I don't want really to leave, though they have come in a bit late. We have Safira Ali from Bokoto. I think government should try to pay subsidies for some products. He says that. Then we also have Good Morning Uganda. I'm Richard Morondera from Entebbe. He says, thanks for the best presentation of the week. I like the guest, and how can I join Fine Spinners for training?
Sure. So basically you could just come to Fine Spinners. We have an HR platform. They would induct you into the process and get you onto training. Very happy and very keen to have more people join our training programs. As I said, they run every week. In terms of subsidies to sectors, that's an interesting one, because a lot of Western countries and WTO tries to push that we should not subsidize sectors X, Y, Z. However, if we look at the main agents in the room, the US, the French, very big agricultural economy in France, there are subsidies that exist in those countries to support those sectors. So I think we already have the outline from NDP3 on what are the agri-value chains we want to support. Let's support those value chains, and let's see how we can create global competitiveness there. I don't think, why does the US have to subsidize its farmers and the French? They have a very high cost base. An American farmer and a French farmer is never going to be able to compete on pure cost with a Ugandan farmer. So I think for my sector, the way to actually move away from large subsidies from government and increasing government debt, X, Y, Z, is to actually ensure that the local agri-value chains are exploiting local costs, which are very competitive, and not buying raw materials on international pricing, such as New York futures for cotton.
Oh, I love that. Of that, you hear them crying over fertilizers, inputs and all that. But there's also another good question here, I must say. Mr. Sev is on spot on building small holder supply chains. On credit, which is high, what's your experience working with Uganda Development Bank to avail cheap credit to your company, but also help organized farmer groups get it too? We are in cassava value chain and facing similar challenges. Secondly, need to share notes. Kindly avail. Okay, he wants to know how. When you talk about UBDB, so what has been your experience? And
so we have not done anything with the UDB. I think the development banks in Uganda, first of all, they've been recently capitalized, but still the amount of money sitting in them is not, I think, substantial to actually allow investment in a lot of the value chains that needs to be done. I think With development banks, you must be looking at significantly longer tenor than what even our development banks like UDB look at. For instance, there is a textile investment in Kenya called Rivertex, which got Exim Bank of India money for 25 years at 2% interest. Now, who can't make money on a business with that sort of a funding line? Now, that exists for our competitors across the world. In the cassava value chain, I don't know what they would probably get, but you know, even our development banks, our tenor of money and our cost of funds, the cheapest cost of funds in Uganda shillings from UDB would be 12%, 10%. Still, that's not what I call development money. DFI money from IFC, from World Bank, from Norfund, you're looking at single digit in dollar. So we need to get more of that capital here if we're going to actually allow these value chains which are looking for agro-processing in Uganda for an export market. You're competing with countries which have their financing sorted out. And so that's why that eats into the margins incredibly.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Asef Bedi. It's been a pleasure having you, and of course a wealth of information that we've shared, and I believe our viewers have really learned a lot more so why we should continue promoting, buying what is made here in Uganda. I want to leave you with the sportsman. He's ready to take you through, that is all the sports updates, and of course many catch interesting stories in that lane. See you, have a lovely day.
God did not even name a woman. It was Adam. Where she is, I'm there too. I'm not a representative of her. She's me.